Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this little video and, of course, talk about one of the best boxers in the world, Mr. Naoya Inoue. Of course, I do want to post more videos about Mr. Terence Crawford as well, but unfortunately, I just have not found the right videos as of yet that I find kind of informative enough, or worth for me to review as of yet in order for me to put, certain debates out there or for me to overall kind of talk about it. But of course, Terence Crawford was able to, pretty much cement his career over the weekend as one of the greatest boxers of all time, unquestionably, and probably as the undisputed best of his era, or at least, up there with a guy like that of an Alexander Usyk, or, it would be debated probably between the two of them. But many people, of course, for this generation, they are going to remember this as the Terence Crawford era, as they should, because Terence Crawford, of course, was undefeated. He never really had a fight where many people thought that he arguably lost. And although he doesn't really have the resume of some other all-time great level fighters, he is someone that did enough in his career, especially with the undisputed titles and beating the best super middleweight of his era, Canelo Alvarez, beating the best welterweight of his era, Errol Spence Jr. Those two victories are going to be vastly remembered, especially because both of those guys were former top 5 pound fighters. And Canelo Alvarez at one point in time was looked at as the former number one pound for pound fighter in all the sport. So Terence Crawford definitely is going to be remembered as one of the greater fighters. But of course, the fight that happened, I believe, in the morning, of course, was that of Mr. Naoya Inoue, or I believe on that, early on Sunday morning, because this fight ended up happening in Japan. And of course, although I ended up getting my Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford fight prediction wrong, because I thought Canelo was going to pull out the victory, the Inoue versus MJ Akhmadaliev fight, it pretty much went exactly to a T, well, at least almost about how I thought that it was going to go. I think that in my final prediction that I predicted that Inoue was going to get the stoppage because I thought maybe after a while that either Inoue would pressure him a little bit more or that MJ would go a little bit more desperately at him and run into something. But I wasn't really surprised that this went to unanimous decision because MJ Akhmadaliev is someone that, is a little bit more of a careful fighter. I thought that maybe if, he got super far behind that he would try to get a bit more desperate in that of the latter rounds, but it didn't really happen. I mean, he did try, pretty much for what he could do, but, he really didn't, in my personal view, sell out in order to win the fight. And basically, of course, for those of you that don't know what that means, he really didn't try, over to go balls to the wall. Sometimes when you're losing a fight like that, you have to risk even possibly getting knocked out because you're definitely not winning the fight, overall just trying to outpoint the guy. But I was not surprised that this went to unanimous decision because it was very obvious when I took a look at it that Naoya Inoue respected MJ Akhmadaliev than a lot of the other opponents that he had fought. And I'm not going to claim that Inoue was quote unquote avoiding MJ Akhmadaliev, but what I will state is this. Sometimes a fighter, when they don't call them out immediately, they know that that's a guy that, I'll fight them if I have to, but if I don't have to, it's not going to hurt my feelings either. And I think that it's very good for Inoue that he eventually fought that of an MJ Akhmadaliev, but Inoue is someone that usually calls out opponents, quite frequently, at least from what I've seen. He's someone that had no problem addressing the Stevon Coolboy Fulton fight. He was someone that had no problem addressing the Lewis Neri fight. However, for whatever reason, he, did not appear to really ever mention MJ Akhmadaliev. And I think that their side could kind of pick up on it a little bit. Now, of course, I think that they kind of rubbed salt into the wound a little bit more or tried to piss Inoue off a little bit more, by stating that he was quote unquote avoiding them or ducking them. I don't think that Inoue was ever ducking them because MJ Akhmadaliev, by the time Inoue got there, didn't have the official titles. But the point overall is that Inoue, and he even stated heading into this fight, that MJ Akhmadaliev is a different breed of fighter that I usually fight. So that being stated, Inoue needed to put on an impressive performance, and that's exactly what he did. And just in my personal view, I did not give MJ Akhmadaliev a single round within this fight. I mean, I could maybe see one, maybe two if you were being a little bit generous, but I did not think that he won a single round in the fight. But after this performance, because this was a big victory in Inoue's career, it probably is around, the third, fourth, maybe fifth A-grade level win in Inoue's career. It kind of depends on, who you count as A-grade, for his career. In my personal view, of course, you have Steve Von Coolboy Fulton. You also have that of a Marlon Tapales, who I thought was a heavily underrated win, who got the win over Akhmadaliev, by the way. And of course, you also have MJ Akhmadaliev. Now, you could count maybe certain fighters like a Donaire, although he wasn't quite the same, and he was losing the guys at higher weight classes that were similar in size, and I don't think I would ever label anywhere near close to the A-grade level. But I mean, it's kind of up to you. He was undefeated at that weight class, I believe, and overall, he ended up defeating two undefeated champions or contenders. So if you wanted to claim A minus, I could kind of understand. It's up to you. To me, it's debatable. And then, of course, there's also his win over Louis Neri. That's also a debate whether it's A minus or B plus. It's kind of up to you. But anyways, there is no question about it in my view. Inoue did stack up another A-grade level win in his career by beating that of an MJ Akhmadaliev. And this, at the very least, is the third A-grade level win in his career. But the question is about Naoya Inoue right now, especially after he also is undisputed in two separate weight classes, just like what a Terence Crawford was formerly, and of course how a Usyk was as well. And of course he's a four-weight division champion and someone that, of course has pretty much beaten everybody that he's needed to at those weight classes. What really is next for Inoue? And another question about Naoya Inoue is that who has the potentiality to beat him, and is he possibly the best boxer in the world? We're going to talk about this overall by reviewing that, of BoxingWave, a channel that I've always recommended to a lot of people because BoxingWave, whether I agree with him or not, one thing that I'll give the man credit for is that I don't see a lot of this political/racial bullshit that I see overall with other channels. Of course, what certain people may call it today is quote-unquote tribalism or certain things like that. And maybe people are kind of referring, that to fans, but a lot of the times they're also referring, of course, to quote-unquote racial bias. And I actually don't think overall that there's a huge problem with tribalism, or at least supporting your own or rooting for your own. But I do think that it does become a little bit of a problem when you start to spread a lot of these bullshit narratives in order to support your view because you want certain things, to be true overall because of a racialized motivation. But that being stated, I don't usually see that, from BoxingWave, so I give the man a lot of credit. Anyways, that being stated overall, let's get into the video. Let's see what the man has to say.
What's good, YouTube? This is BoxingWave. Yo, quick recap of this fight. First of all, I can't believe that I went live for this fight. Shout out to anybody that was here. I mean, we were all pretty much dead that morning. If you was here the night before where we stayed up.
I agree. I was staying up, all the way overall to watch that fight. And then after the first fight, unfortunately, something ended up happening where apparently one of the guys got, some sort of brain damage. And I did not look up overall into it. So hopefully that gentleman is okay. But I believe that in the first fight, I believe that his name was, I actually don't remember his name, but I believe that it was another Japanese fighter or another Asian fighter. And, he ended up unfortunately suffering a headbutt from his opponent. I believe that it was an accidental head clash, and he pretty much ended up collapsing and fainting immediately, which is something that actually I've never seen before. So that definitely was something that is very serious, because when you see that, that means that it could very possibly be severe brain damage. And oftentimes when an ambulance is called, at least immediately because someone is unconscious, usually that means that either A, they have serious brain damage, and I've seen that result in a multitude of deaths, like that of Max Dadachev, I believe, when he fought Subriel Matias, or overall that they have to be put in a medicinal coma. So or a medically induced coma, of course. So hopefully that gentleman is okay. But of course, yes, that fight has started very, very late.
Up until 1 a.m. to watch Crawford against Canelo. And then stayed up a little late after the fight was over, just on a live, just chatting. And then when I cut off the live, I didn't even go to bed right away. I didn't go to bed until our time, about 3:30 in the morning. And the card began at 4 a.m. in the morning. So I barely got any sleep, like maybe 2 hours tops before I went back live. Crazy. I was like pretty much, I don't even know how I was able to go on live and cover this fight. But shout out to everyone that was here, because a few of you guys that was here the previous evening or a few hours earlier woke up with me, and there was like nobody on YouTube covering this fight. I mean, it's crazy because this was arguably maybe a top three opponent, top three, top four matchup for Inoue in his career. And
I agree with that. I think that obviously the biggest opponent in his career, and when I say biggest, I'm talking about probably, the biggest threat to him obviously was Stephon Fulton. And then after that, I'm not really quite sure who you would say. Maybe a Marlon DePalis or an MJ Akhmadaliev, then a Donaire, or a Lewis Neri. But those pretty much are the top five opponents in his career. Number one, I think, hands down, would have to be Stephon Fulton, just because he was a guy that, is a very technically savvy boxer. He's someone that, overall can fight in a multitude of ways, very, very good. And he pretty much got his ass whooped and completely outboxed by that of an Inoue. And he's someone that's a very technical boxer. He, I believe, overall is even a champion at 126 right now. So he's a very special fighter. So I'd have to go number one for him. Then a number two, number three, that's a toss-up between Marlon DePalis and MJ Akhmadaliev. But in my personal view, I think I'd actually have to go with Marlon DePalis. Not only did he beat MJ Akhmadaliev, but in my view, there are certain things that he kind of had in his game that MJ Akhmadaliev was not willing to do. Now, they're on a very similar level, but, Marlon DePalis actually, I thought, had a better all-around counter game, in certain mid-ranges and in certain overall up-close ranges. I thought that MJ Akhmadaliev maybe had the better feed of the two. I thought that he was someone that, overall, in a way, took very, very seriously. But that being stated, Marlon DePalis was right there.
And it was an undisputed fight, and at super bantamweight, and yeah, we was on. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, MJ Akhmadaliev, with all of the ducking claims that he had for Inoue for the last couple of years, Eddie Hearn as well, didn't show up for the fight. He was there, but
Well, I think that MJ Akhmadaliev did everything that he could do. I understand why a lot of people are criticizing MJ because he was talking a lot of shit, and at the end of the day, when you talk a lot of shit or your fans talk a lot of shit, that rebuttal is going to come back very harshly. It just is what it is. But that being stated, Eddie Hearn, I can't really blame him because, of course, he's just trying to get his fight of the fight. And I think that he's seen that Inoue was not super interested to fight that of an MJ Akhmadaliev unless he really had to, and that was, of course, a very, very good fight. But anyways, point is that, when I take a look at it, nothing about the fight really surprised me. I had a feeling that Inoue was going to start off with a body attack very early on, which is usually what a lot of elite level boxers do when they're kind of trying to feel out their opponent and see what openings they will have and how they're going to react to that. And Inoue pretty much started off with a good right hand and also an elite level jab to the body very early on. And it didn't surprise me once again that this fight went to unanimous decision. I think that I originally had predicted it to go to unanimous decision, but then at the end of my video, I predicted it to, go by stoppage because I thought maybe that, after watching the DePalis fight, after he kind of tried to take charge in the latter rounds, that maybe overall he would try to mix it up a little bit more. And I think that he tried, but, he fights, in a little bit too technical of a manner at times, and he's not someone that has the vast amount of skills as that of a Naoya Inoue. And when I say that he fights a little bit too technical at times, sometimes there are times where you end up losing a fight because you don't end up throwing enough. And MJ Akhmadaliev, I was not confident enough in his ability overall just from watching him fight, kind of like a Madrimov, that he was going to be able to kind of go outside of his range or his style in order to possibly mix it up with Inoue. I just did not see that happening. He's someone that, kind of throws 1-2s. He's someone that, is not a great combination puncher. He's someone that is not a volume guy. He's someone overall that really tries to get you off of accuracy. And those guys, if they can't mix it up, they're very vulnerable to losing fights once they finally face the big times. Because, they rely so much on their accuracy that when they finally fight a guy that also has a great skill set or is an A-grade level fighter, but also knows how to sometimes mix it up by throwing a little bit more volume, they end up losing some of their bigger fights. Like an MJ Akhmadaliev or a Danny Garcia, for example. Danny Garcia is someone that, in my view, was an A- level fighter. He beat certain guys like Amir Khan and Lucas Matisse, Robert Guerrero, certain guys like that. He was a legit A-grade level fighter. Beat a couple of other guys, Paulie Malignaggi, I believe, former champions. But anyways, the point is that when Danny Garcia finally got in the ring with certain guys like a Keith Thurman and a Sean Porter. Although I don't think that Danny's skill set was that far off of theirs, he overall relied a little bit too much on his accuracy, and he's not quite as good of a counterpuncher in my view, or quite as good of a boxer, or does not have as much in his skill set as what he needed in order to win off of that style. So the point is that Inoue is someone that, just like the all-time greats, he can win off of volume, he can win off of accuracy, he can basically win in whatever way that he needs to. The only weakness I will say in Inoue's style, in my view, at least, in terms of, certain ranges, is that I would not claim that he's the greatest inside fighter that I've ever seen. He is someone that, kind of, shells up in that high guard, and it can be successful to a degree, but he also lets people kind of beat up on his guard or his arms a little bit too much, in my view, which can be a bit dangerous because sometimes people can get stuff through your guard. So I do think that he has to be very careful with that. But the point also is that, overall, when it comes to that of an Inoue, he's someone that, especially within the mid and the long range, and he's competent enough on the inside range, in my view, to where he pretty much can beat you in whatever way that he needs to.
He took the approach where he kind of just laid down for the fight. He was rarely ever aggressive in that fight. In my opinion, he only won one round. One of the judges, I believe, gave him 3 rounds, and I think the other 2 gave him 2 rounds. And I think those are sympathy rounds. I think one of the...
I agree. I think they seen MJ Akhmadaliev, land one punch on him, and they said, you know what? We're going to give it to the guy because this guy hasn't been able to land shit. And, we thought that MJ Akhmadaliev, won that round because that's really the only punch I've seen him land throughout this whole entire fight. Certain fighters overall just end up winning rounds off of that because maybe it's not a round that they actually deserve to win, but it's been their best round so far.
Maybe,
especially if it's a fight that was expected overall to do a little bit better. The judges kind of take a look at it and they're like, wow, like this fight is that far apart? Like, there's no way.
One of the other rounds, he landed one or two good shots. And then I know in the final round, he landed a couple good shots as well. But as far as round by round, he got dominated. He got outboxed. And I think Inoue fought the perfect fight. Inoue, in my opinion, and you guys saw the breakdown, I thought that this was definitely one that was likely to go to a decision. I put money on MJ because I thought he was too far as an underdog. It was plus 620 is what my bet was on.
Which, of course, means that I believe that he did not predict MJ to win, but just in case MJ did win the fight, of course, he would win a lot of money. This is just my personal view of it. Even with the fights that, I'm the most confident on, I'm not someone that really is a gambler. I'm not someone that is a bettor. And the reason why I say that is because, first of all, I think that, you always need to be very frugal with your money. And that overall, that, you never know when you may have a Mike Tyson or a Buster Douglas moment or something like that to where you may have an upset or a Mayorga versus Avernon Forrest. So just in my personal view, I mean, you can do whatever you want to with your money. It's not my business. But that's just my personal advice. I'm not someone that's a bettor. Like, I had someone overall, like on my Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez fight predictions. He was talking to all these people, including myself, and saying, well, if you truly believe that, you should put a lot of money on it. It's like, why would I do that? And why would a certain amount of other people do that? And then he was called out in the comment section, and people were asking him if he was betting, and he wasn't even betting on the fight anyway. So, first of all, overall, don't be hypocritical. And then second of all, when it comes down to it, just my personal view, I would not recommend for anybody overall to usually bet on fights or sports. I'm not someone that's a gambler whatsoever. But especially something that is never a complete confirmed result.
And obviously he lost, but the prediction was Inoue to win on points. And I was very disappointed in MJ. I thought that
I wasn't really disappointed in MJ whatsoever. I pretty much gave it a 50-50 chance that Inoue was either going to get the latter round stoppage or he was going to win by unanimous decision. I was not really surprised, and the reason why I was not disappointed was because MJ is someone a lot like a Majimov, to where you can tell that those Uzbekistani guys, they're very talented and they have the footwork and all sort of stuff and yada yada. Like, they're guys that on the surface, they're almost like, like, I'm not really quite sure overall how to compare it. Like they're almost, something that looks very, very pretty on the outside, but then you take a look at the inside and it's pretty much a husk. And I'm not claiming overall that MJ doesn't have any character, that he doesn't have, any any, overall boxing greatness to him. He is someone that is a very good fighter. But a lot of people, when they take a look at great feet or, overall good movement feints and, this amateur pedigree, they can kind of get mixed up overall in the facade that this guy might be better than what he actually is. And just because that ends up happening does not mean that they're going to be an elite level fighter. I've seen the same thing with Madrimov. Now once again, I'm not someone that gets every single one of my predictions right, as seen by the Canelo and Crawford fight, but I do get the majority of them right, which is why I had predicted that Virgil Ortiz was more than likely going to defeat that of an Israel Madrimov or Madrimov, because those guys, they throw, a certain amount of feints. They're not, guys that really work off of volume. They have to work off of accuracy, and they have to work off of running you into certain shots, whether that's on the front foot or the back foot. And I did state in my fight prediction that more than likely, I did not think that was going to work, because Inoue is someone that can create his own offense, and he can create it in a multitude of ways. MJ Akhmadaliev is someone that he can create his own offense, but after a while, he kind of wants you to run into his shots and play his own game. And if you don't play his game, he's going to have much more of a harder time of winning.
He's going to give us a little bit more. I know he's not the best boxer. He has struggled in other fights that he's had. And then he lost to Marlon Tapales, where he was getting outboxed in that fight. He got outboxed in that fight. But at least at some point he turned it up. I really believe that he felt Inoue's power early on. And even though Inoue was mostly...
I don't personally believe that. And I know that, certain people overall may say, well, what are you talking about? I think that he felt the power. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that it definitely probably did maybe convince MJ not to go forward a little bit. But I think that what ultimately actually set him off was just the skill set of an Inoue. I don't think that he expected Inoue to be as quick as what he was. I don't think that he expected Inoue to have as good as feet as what he did and to be as elusive as what he did. And I don't know if he quite expected the jab to be as good as what, it was. Now, I mean, I expected those things because, I see Inoue and that's what I see out of him. But the point is that I think MJ, especially with his amateur pedigree, I think he was expecting Inoue to be a little bit less than what he actually was, and he wasn't.
Hot shotting and moving and keeping his distance. I think the power was enough.
But don't get it twisted. The power, Inoue is someone that has monstrous power. No pun intended. He's someone that, he really is a monster.
He got hit with enough clean, hard shots to make him aware of Inoue's power and make him not want to engage with him. So it was kind of disappointing. I knew Inoue was going to be outboxing him early, but I didn't think that MJ would go the whole fight without being aggressive. And then a few times that he did.
I wasn't really majorly surprised by that. What I will state is this. I definitely, I will agree with BoxingWave to this extent. I definitely thought that MJ, which is why in my final prediction that, I thought Inoue was eventually going to get the knockout, because I thought that he was going to be slightly more aggressive in the second half of the fight, because I predicted that he was going to be massively down on the scorecards, which is exactly what happened. But at the same time, it was just obvious that maybe with a combination of the power and the skills that he just did not feel comfortable kind of going out of his style and, really trying to hit in a way. There was times where he did go for broke, but nowhere near enough to the point to where it would have actually mattered. He did hit in a way with some good shots, especially a good right hook, I think, or a good right hand in the 12th round or something like that. But other than that, I mean, MJ just did not do anywhere near enough in order to set Inoue off.
A few times that he really tried to attack Inoue when he was on the ropes. Inoue was, there was one punch that was like in a later part of the fight where Inoue lined him up with this clean uppercut. You'll see him in highlight.
I think that was like the 9th round. I remember that punch. That was one of the beautiful punches. MJ Akhmadaliev ducked down right into that. But honestly, Inoue, in this fight, to me, just in my personal view, I could be wrong, Inoue did not look like he put as much power behind his shots in this fight as what he usually does. I think Inoue at times, it depends on the opponent, but he's definitely not someone that's flat-footed, but he will at times plant his feet a little bit more sometimes inside the range. Overall, I think when he wants to exchange with you a little bit, or if he really wants to punish you. I think he took a look at this fight and said, you know what? MJ is someone that has a very extensive amateur pedigree. He's someone that can really box. He's very talented. He's bigger than me. He's someone that also has a great physique and is very strong. If I am not on my P's and Q's in this fight, he can potentially hit me with something, just like some of those other guys did, like a Roman Cardenas or a Luis Neri did. And then on top of that, this fight could be a little bit closer than what I want it to be. And I don't want to get screwed on the scorecards or possibly get knocked out being hit with something stupid. So I'm going to put on a little bit more of a masterclass instead of more of a brawl show for this, And I think that that pretty much was the right way to go. And in no way am I claiming that Inoue is just this brawler that, overall will just stupidly go in there. But that being stated, Inoue I do think is, someone, there's a saying overall called the curse of the gifted. Inoue is so gifted as an athlete and so gifted as a boxer that I think sometimes he gets in the ring and things are just a little bit too easy for him. And that's why I think he kind of made certain mistakes against Neri and also Roman Cardenas. Not stating that, of course, to make excuses saying that he does not have faults in his style. But it was very obvious when Inoue made those mistakes that those are very, beginner mistakes. He threw a punch when he really should have not. He was at the complete wrong angle when it came down to it. And then on top of that, sometimes Inoue will keep his hands down, or his hand down inside the range, when he's throwing a certain shot. Sometimes Inoue is so athletically gifted and so technically gifted that he kind of, for a moment, gets a little bit too bloodthirsty. And I think he took a look at this fight against MJ and said, you know what, I can't afford to do that this time. So I'm going to have to really be on my, P's and Q's here. And I think that, don't get it twisted, I think he put power behind his shots. And I think MJ was definitely feeling it. His face was definitely marked up. But I don't think Inoue put as much power behind the shots in this fight as what he did in some of his others. Because I think that speed was a little bit more important in this fight to him and elusivity.
I mean, Inoue looked great. And MJ just wasn't a top opponent for Inoue. A lot of the guys.
Well, that's pretty much exactly what I had predicted. MJ is someone, in my personal view, that is an A- to A grade level fighter for those weight classes. But when we talk about the legit threats to Inoue, you're talking about Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez and Junto Nakatani. And then, of course, if he moves up a weight class, then you're talking about guys like Nick Ball, Bruce Shushu, Carrington, and there might be some other ones that I'm forgetting. Is Foster there? Is Oshiko Foster there? Maybe that's at 130. I can't remember. I think that's at 130 now that I think about it, because he's fighting someone next, that's notable. Oh, wait, no. Isn't Stephon Fulton fighting Oshiko Foster next, there? I think, isn't he, right? I think so. And Fulton's the current champion there. That's going to be a tough one to predict. I got to look at that. But anyways, we'll see about that. But anyways, when it comes down to the overall, so we'll see who ends up winning that. There's a few other fighters. I think there's one other fighter that I'm definitely forgetting. Maybe it was formerly MJ. I'm not sure. But either way, the fights that I would love to see Inoue in, recently, definitely would be, guys I believe like that. Of a Nick Ball, I believe that he's an A-grade level fighter. He was able to beat Ray Ford, who's very, very talented, and also was a decent amount bigger than him. He also was able to defeat the undefeated Sam Goodman. Not someone that I would claim is anywhere above an A- or B+, but he still was able to beat him dominantly, in my view anyway. I thought that the commentary was very biased in that fight. I thought that the judges had it right, where one of them had Nick Ball winning 9 rounds to 3. That's exactly what I had it. Of course, Oshiko Foster, that might be a good fight. Bruce Shushu, Carrington, Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and of course, Junto Nakatani. Those are the fights that I really want to see Inoue in. That being stated, I just don't know if the Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez fight is really going to happen right now. A, because Bam Bam Rodriguez is a couple weight classes below. And B, because I'm not quite sure if their team really wants Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez to fight Inoue yet. I think that they're really kind of hoping that Inoue is going to show a little bit of wear and tear over these next few years, and then maybe they can take advantage. But we'll see.
Cardenas, like Neri,
because I believe that they have much bigger plans for that of a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez than that of an Inoue. Say whatever you want to, but at the end of the day, Inoue is an Oriental Japanese fighter, and unless you're someone like a Manny Pacquiao that, first of all, can speak English because he's Filipino, and he's someone overall that was able to beat the shit out of a multitude of guys and kind of accidentally became a humongous star, when it came down to it. Unless you're one of those guys, I just don't see why they would want Inoue over that of a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez. someone who I believe is a Mexican fighter and also speaks English, I believe they would probably much more rather go with him. Boxing can say whatever they want to about, how certain fighters overall that they go through, certain double standards, and they definitely do. But in a way, boxing also does help, to a certain degree to make sure that, especially around the American area, that black American boxers or Mexican American boxers or Latino boxers, that they pretty much are kind of pushed forward because they're usually the boxers that make the most amount of money. So in a way, although he's a great, great boxer, he's someone that he needs to be very careful because, he might be someone that, especially in a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez fight, they might try to fuck him over because, I think that they would rather go with the Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and he's also significantly younger than Inoue, I believe. So we'll see.
Marlon, a lot of the guys where the matchup before the fight didn't look like it was going to be a dangerous fight for Inoue. A lot of these guys, even though they were stopped, they gave a better performance. You know what I mean? I understand, like, this would happen with Jamel and Canelo. Jamel didn't really want to engage. He moved around a lot and stuff like that. And he said after the fight, he's like, I wasn't going to get knocked out. I felt this power. But, this is like a similar situation where even though MJ didn't really run. He didn't run or anything. He didn't want to engage with him either. It was like he was scared to throw punches. He was scared to get countered. I'll give you one or two.
Well, there wasn't really anything once again within the fight that really showed me that pretty much what MJ showed me is everything that I already knew about him. Someone overall that's a very good fighter, a grade level fighter, but he's someone overall that, once again, he does not throw a whole bunch of volume. He really only fights, in a couple of ways. He can fight somewhat within a multitude of ways, but he prefers for you to run into his traps. And if you don't do that, then he's going to have a lot more of a harder time.
Rounds of just trying to fill out Inoue, but and I'm not saying he should have fought a reckless fight, but he was neutralized and he looked very limited. He looked very.
Well, I'm not saying that he should have fought a reckless fight either, but at the end of the day, when you're down and you've basically lost the complete first half of the fight, you're going to have to start selling out a little bit. I'm not claiming overall get knocked out, but you're going to have to at least go in there and really, really try to rough this guy up. And I don't think that he had enough confidence to really do that within a way, A, because that's just not his style. Because even against Marlon DePalas, he was not someone that was just going in there, overall really just trying to knock Marlon DePalas out. He was going in there, and I think overall that he was trying to pressure DePalas and mix it up a little bit more. But DePalas also was kind of wearing out in the second half of the fight a bit. Inoue was not. And I think that, MJ could kind of see that and said, you know what? And this is where I will agree with Wave, overall BoxingWave, that this probably did have to do a little bit more with power, because he said, you know what, this dude can really punch, and if I go in there and really try to push the pace and, do something reckless, this guy might knock me out.
Very average. He looked like he didn't have any boxing ability at all. This looked like a stiff brute, like a guy that was really strong, but didn't really have any skills to do anything with Inoue outside of a few.
I thought that MJ Akhmadaliev looked good for what he was. But he looks like, basically another one of these, European fighters that come from the amateurs that have a very awkward style. People pretty much go on and on about them because of their amateur pedigree. Then they get in the ring, overall with the guy that actually is a legit great professional boxer, and they pretty much, get exposed for certain things that they more than likely A, are not comfortable with doing, or B, cannot do, or both. It just is what it is. Now, of course, we do know that there are some great European, fighters from the amateur pedigree that, of course, did make it. Artur Beterbiev, Dmitry Bivol, Vasyl Lomachenko, Alexander Usyk, and, a multitude of others. But that being stated, overall, there also are some to where, they kind of, over-exaggerated their pedigree to a certain degree. Like that, say, of a Sergei Bohachuk or some of these other guys, or, Kerrigan Chuchian, or, Chuchichan, or whatever the fuck his name is, the guy who fought Jaron Boots-Ennis, some of those other guys, not every single one of those guys are an A-plus level fighter. Now, I would probably say that MJ Akhmadaliev is probably above, say, someone like a Sergei Bohachuk or some of those other guys, but that being stated, overall, it's not by very much.
Good shots in his fight. He really didn't do much of anything, it's just a poor performance, and, moving forward, I really want to see what he can do moving forward, because I'm not sure I think a lot of the potential fights that he could have with some of the other top guys in the division, he might lose to some of these other guys. You know what I mean? Just
He very well might. I mean, it depends on who you put NJ Akhmadaliev in the ring with. If you put him in the ring with guys like that of a Lewis Neri or something like that, I think he can beat a Lewis Neri. If you put him in the ring with a guy like maybe even a rematch against Tapalas, maybe he can beat Tapalas in a rematch. There might be some other guys that of course he can beat that I'm not thinking of at the current moment in time. But in my view, if you put him in against guys like that of a Steve Von Fulton or Nick Ball or certain guys like that, he's not going to defeat those guys. Now that being stated, those guys are a weight class up, but the point is that those guys could possibly even fit at 122 pounds. I don't know if I would favor MJ over either of those fighters.
based on this performance, um, he might lose to some of these other guys. I mean, he could have, him and Fulton could have unified and
I think Fulton more than likely would have outboxed out of an MJ Akhmadaliev. I think that MJ would have had a chance just because Fulton overall is, someone that tries to box a little bit more. And then on top of that, he's someone that doesn't quite have the power of that, of an Inoue. I do agree with Wave that the power that it definitely was a factor against MJ Akhmadaliev. That being stated, I think that Fulton more than likely would have probably very clearly outboxed MJ Akhmadaliev. I think that it would have went to a decision, of course, but I think that he would have beat him probably about 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4.
fought for undisputed while they were at 122. But even though Fulton was stopped by it in a way, I would expect the Fulton to beat him too. I mean, I don't know, like what was that, And no blame on Inoue. His approach was to box and fight a smart, cautious fight. I think he prepared to fight a 12-round fight.
I do as well. There was nothing about Inoue within this fight that really showed me that he was really trying to get the stoppage. There was a couple of times that Inoue, I think really tried to pressure MJ a little bit, and overall I think that he was like, okay, maybe I can go for it, but then when he seen that MJ was a little bit too tough and a little bit too elusive to just be knocked out like some of his other opponents, he said, you know what, let me just let me not play with my food here. Let me make sure overall that I do not go a little bit too far out of my comfort zone for this fight. I have a plan, I have an objective, and I'm not trying to get knocked out or get knocked down like what I did in some of my other fights. So let's, let's take overall the more cautious approach.
There was periods in the fight where he started to really come at NJ and baiting him. Most for the most part, he stuck with the 1-2. He used a few angles here and there and stuff like that. But for the most part, he stuck with throwing straight shots from long range. Used his jab and had some good timing. Was able to lure MJ in for some trap.
By the way, Mr. Naoya Inoue, he might have the best left hook overall of this generation. When I take a look at Inoue, he's someone that, when you talk about that left hook, that left hook that he has overall is just phenomenal. When you talk about some of these other boxers that were the elites of their day, Canelo Alvarez, of course, probably has the best shovel hook or the best, fake hook up to the head or to the body. When you talk about Crawford, he probably has the best left uppercut that I've ever seen to the body. When you talk about that of an Alexander Usyk, he has a great, overhand left or straight left down the pipe or retreating left, as we've seen against Danny Dubois. Inoue has literally one of the most beautiful left hooks in whatever range he needs to throw it that I've ever seen. Like, I remember that left hook against Lewis Neri when he threw it on the retreat. Inoue has one of the most beautiful left hooks I've ever seen, and he can hide it within a multitude of ways as well. Like, one of his favorite combinations, I believe, is to kind of throw the lead hand, then stick the right hand out there. And if it lands, it lands, but if it doesn't, then he'll keep it in front of your face to kind of hide it in front of your face, and then he'll have the left hook go around the guard, and he'll hit you, and then he'll get outside the range. Inoue is a master overall at hiding certain punches as well, or he is a master boxer. He is a phenomenal level boxer.
At times, but there was periods in each round where he started to come forward and attack, but he didn't overdo it. He didn't want to overdo it. I think he respected. I think he had a little bit too much respect for his opponent, and that's because of the styles and the matchups, how we all view them going into the match. It's no different from Crawford against Madrimov. Like, I think sometimes
Agreed.
certain fighters are in control, but they don't want to overdo it. He fought a smart fight because of who he was and that was that. Inoue dominated this fight. Again, I only gave NJ the final round, and that was pretty much it. Some people had a shutout. So yeah, at this point, there's only 2 fights left. And David Picasso is going to be fighting him right before the new year. I think David's an undefeated fighter. He's 31 wins with 0 losses. Mexican fighter, guy that doesn't have a high. The one thing I will say about David, and from what I've seen from him, right, because this is a fight that was already supposed to happen.
Personally, I've never seen much of David Picasso. I believe there was a Picasso that fought on the undercard that got, a knockout within 4 rounds. Maybe that's the same Picasso that he's talking about, but I don't think so. I'll have to see more of David Picasso.
The one thing I'll say about David Picasso is that I think he has more KOs I think he has more power than his KO ratio states. You know what I mean? Again, Inoue has been dropped twice in his previous 5 fights. And those guys are considered punchers. Even though Cardenas was not a guy that we wasn't really familiar with him. At least I wasn't. And most people wasn't. But
well, Inoue overall, not only, first of all, had a little bit more vulnerability within that fight because I think that he got a little bit too overconfident, which Inoue does have to be very careful of. Inoue reminds me a lot of someone like a Roy Jones. He's so athletically gifted that at times he makes certain mistakes that other boxers would probably not be able to get away with. Now, I think that Inoue overall actually does certain things that are probably a little bit more defensively responsible than what, even a prime Roy Jones Jr. did. Because oftentimes, prime Roy Jones Jr., he would keep his hands down way, 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 way too much during the fight. He would not, keep them close to his face enough, in my personal view, which is why once he got older, he started getting knocked out by guys like Antonio Tarver. Although Tarver, of course, couldn't tie Roy Jones Jr.'s shoelaces, at least at his absolute peak. Although, Tarver was a good A-grade level fighter. Just, he wasn't someone, in my view, that I would classify as a, for sure, all-time great. But, it is what it is. Anyways, that being stated, overall, Inoue is someone that, he does have to be very careful with that. But Inoue, obviously, is also someone that rises to the occasion when he fights a certain level of competition.
David Picasso is a guy that definitely sits down on his punches. So when you see the 17 knockouts with the 31 wins, he has KO power, but the ratio is not that high. But being that Inoue has been dropped, and Inoue is a guy that's moved up 4 or 5 different divisions. He skipped a division, but he's moved up. You got to remember, he's still naturally a smaller guy compared to most of these guys he's fighting up at 122. And David is a guy that I believe will give a better match to MJ. He would probably get stopped. I think it would be more likely for him to get stopped. But I think David is not a guy that's going to lay down for him. He does sit down on his punches. You know what I mean? He does go to the body. But he's going to have a hard time getting in range, just like MJ did, just like a lot of other guys did. But I think David is going to...
Inoue has great feet as well. He has very, very, very fast feet, which is something overall that Inoue I think will have to keep as an advantage when he moves up the weight class to 126 pounds. Now, I do think that maybe it would behoove him to gain a little bit of weight, for that weight class, but, to gain a little bit of power, because Roman Cardenas, once again, he was a guy that was a little bit bigger than the, usual Inoue opponent, even bigger than MJ Akhmadaliev. He was a guy that had fought at 126, I believe, once or twice, and you could tell. And Inoue, overall, that's the reason why it took him 8 rounds to knock that guy out, even though he was hitting him with so many shots. Not only because he was a better boxer a little bit than what I think Inoue expected, and then on top of that, he also was a guy that clearly had weight and size, and Inoue's level of power and overall, his level of all-around athleticism did not affect this guy to the same degree as what it once did. So I actually do think that it would be good for Inoue to gain a little bit of weight, when he moves up to 126, just a little bit of muscle mass, but of course not too much to take away his speed.
Push the pace a little bit harder than what MJ did. This is that I think he would eventually get stopped. And that fight is in December. And then in 2026, we'll get, as long as Nakatani wins in his next match, his debut at 122, Junto Nakatani, who I have in my pound for pound list, by the way. I've had him in my top 10 for probably the last year and a half or so.
I'm not exactly sure where Junto Nakatani would be on my pound for pound list. He could be in my top 10 pound for pound list, but I'm just not quite sure if it would be a for sure. But now that Canelo Alvarez, of course, lost to a Terence Crawford and he no longer has any belts, you could maybe debate that Canelo could be outed of the top 10 pound for pound if you wanted to debate that. And of course, there has been some other changes as well. Gervonta Tank Davis, I do not think is any longer there. Devin Haney, I'm not 100% for sure would be there anymore. I mean, it's still a massive debate though, there's some other spots as well. But Nakatani is at the very least a debatable top 10 pound per pound fighter. His resume, in my view, is not the best, but in terms of all around talent and the fact that he is a legit 3-weight division champion, he's someone overall that is a phenomenal level fighter, and he is a serious threat to that of an Inoue. I don't believe that at the current moment in time that I would favor him over an Inoue, but excuse me, if Junto Nakatani did somehow pull off the upset, I would not be shocked.
And I think that's the mega fight. That's one of the best fights. That's a top 5 fight for me in all of boxing.
I agree. That's an amazing fight.
And that'll be next year. As long as he wins his 122 debut, that's coming up soon. That'll be the big fight. He was at the event. Inoue called him out at the end of the fight. And, those guys respectfully respect each other. They're competitors, they're rivals. And rivals are always good as long as you face them. And I think Inoue is having a great career. And I think if he is to beat, and before I end this, I just want to say, I'm not a fan. I'm not one of these guys that want him to go to 126. I'm disappointed at 126, 130. I don't think he should even give those guys at 126 the opportunity up there, because there's a huge difference in size up there.
I will personally agree with that in my view. That being stated, I'm not going to claim that in my view that Inoue should not give them a chance. I do think that he should give them a chance, at least with certain guys like that of a Nick Ball and a Bruce Shushu Carrington. They clearly are going to be girthier than that of an Inoue, but the one guy that obviously is a lot bigger than Inoue, like legitly about 2 to 3 weight classes bigger than him, is that one Mexican fighter there that's like 6'1" or something like that. Like that dude is such a massive, massive weight bully. But but that being stated, there's still fights there at 126 that, in my personal view, I would love to see. I would love to see him versus Nick Ball. I would love to see him versus Bruce Shushu Carrington. I would love to see him versus some of those other guys. He is someone that, overall, in my view, definitely is smaller than all those guys. But he's someone overall, in order for his career to be remembered, if he's ever going to be remembered on the top 10 or top 20 level of all time, he is going to have to, in my view, kind of qualify himself at 126. Especially if he wants to be remembered on a top 10 level of all time or something like that. Could you imagine if Inoue ended up defeating not just Junto Nakatani, but also Nick Ball, Bruce Shushu Carrington, Oshiko Foster, and then on top of that, Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and then possibly even unified at 126 pounds, he'd be top 10 of all time, at least in my personal view.
And some of those guys are good, but over the past 10, 15 years, nobody is unified up there. And I don't think he should fight any of those guys up at 126. I know he might want to go up there and win it.
And there's some other good contenders there as well that aren't too bad either, like Robeisy Ramirez and some other guys. Inoue, in my view, could get a lot more credit in his career if he actually steps up at 126. So that's actually a place where I disagree. I do think that they're definitely bigger than him, but I think for Inoue to get a lot more credit in his career, he is eventually going to have to take a step there. Obviously, the Junto Nakatani fight is huge, but after that, I would love to see him step up to 126, and then maybe, after a few years, they can make a super fight with Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, or maybe a little bit earlier. I'd love to see the Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez fight, but I don't I don't think that they're really looking for that fight at the moment, but we'll see.
Another title in another division, but I don't think he should go up there and fight any of them. I think it should be worth it for him to go up there and fight for a champion up there. Fight somebody that's unified, fight someone that's undisputed. something where you can gain from it. You're the name, you're the name and you're the legend. You're a pound for pound fighter. Those guys at 126 are playing it safe, and they've been playing it safe for years. Even
Well, I mean, you could maybe debate that with some guys, but in my personal view, actually, the 126-pound weight class, it's actually been quite active as of lately. Nick Ball has not just, fought these, Powerpuff Girls. He's fought these guys overall. Like, he literally has fought, I believe, that of Ray Vargas. Ended up getting a draw. He fought that of Raymond Ford, beat him. Then he fought Sam Goodman. Of course, moved him up a weight class, but still, it is what it is. One could debate that in his past couple of fights, he's taken it a little bit more safe, but he's still someone overall that really has a name there. Robisi Ramirez, of course, had a little bit of a career there. Brandon Figueroa is there. Steven Fulton recently became a champion there. He has a big fight against Oshiko Foster, I believe, next. And of course, there's also a multitude of other guys there as well. The one fight that I'm not super hot on for that of an Inoue there is that dude, I believe, I think his name is Espinoza or something like that. Whatever, Rafael Espinoza, I believe his name is. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. Whoever the hell that 1 6'1" Mexican fighter is, like, there's no legit way you can tell me that guy belongs there. Like that's ridiculous.
the class before them and the class before them, they've been playing it safe for years. You know, so I wouldn't even give those guys a satisfaction because size is the only factor in advantage that they have up there. But it's a big.
I don't completely agree with that. I think that 126 actually is filled with a lot of great talents, and I think that 126 is a better weight class all around, at least at the current moment in time, than what 122 is. It just is what it is. So I think that in a way, unfortunately for him, although those guys are a bit bigger, he is going to have to be, if he's going to be remembered as a top 10, potential pound for pound level fighter of all time, just in my view, he's going to have to step up to 126 because there are looked at as legit A grade level talents there. And even, if you don't think that they're all legit A grade level talents, just take a look at that weight class. Nick Ball, I believe, Steven Fulton is now there. Oshiko Foster, I believe, if I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. Robisi Ramirez, I believe. Sam Goodman just recently competed there. There's another fighter that, I'm not personally thinking of that fights there. But there's a multitude of other fighters there that, have competed there. And, it's going to be very interesting.
Size advantage, especially with
Bruce Shushu Carrington, of course, if I forgot him.
Espinoza, guys like Ray Vargas, you know what I mean? Nick Ball is short, but he's extremely stocky, you know what I mean?
Yes, he definitely is.
So I think Inoue should focus on fighting Picasso next, who was already signed and agreed on. Nakatani, if he is to beat Nakatani, and if it's in dominant fashion, either or if he loses, do the run the rematch, But I would be more interested in a Bam Rodriguez jumping up maybe in 2 divisions to fight Inoue or a Nakatani.
I would too. The problem is that I just don't know if Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez is going to do that right now. It does not sound like to me that Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez nor his team that they're very interested in going through that buzzsaw at the current moment in time. And in no way am I claiming that Inoue would just 100% defeat Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez. Rodriguez is a legitimate A-grade level fighter. He's a legitimate A-plus level fighter. He is one of the top 10 pound-per-pound fighters on the planet. But that being stated, we'll see what ends up happening. Anyway, I just don't know if that fight's going to happen right now.
More so than Nakatani or Inoue going up to 126. That's my personal opinion. Again, it'd be legendary to challenge himself to fight a bigger guy doing something like, Canelo and Crawford and all these guys that move up more divisions like himself as well. But there's fights that could be made at 122 without making that jump. And, if he wants to really push himself and fight an Espinoza or something, that would be crazy. But he could do it and make history. That would be great. But he has options, and I think the options are Nakatani, which will happen, and Bam Rodriguez, Bam, that would be great. That would be dope, and I don't even think he would really be smaller than Inoue if they were to fight at 122.
Of course not, because Inoue is not someone that is a natural 122 pounder. He's even a little bit smaller than those guys. So I mean, we'll see what happens.
All right. So yeah, it'll be great performance for Inoue. Again, kept the distance, shot the right hand. Nice uppercuts, nice hooks, nice counters. Even some of the exchanges that they had, he was winning those. So he looked sharp. MJ, I mean, at this point, I want to see who else can he beat at the division at this point. I know he was a former unified guy, but there's still a lot of people like Inoue in the short period of time that he's been there. He's gone straight at some of the top guys at a division. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's my opinion and view on the fight. Again, shout out to everyone that woke up with me that morning that was here and checked out the live. We were burnt out. My dad got up. We watched the fight. It was a good time. But yeah, man, and shout out to all the new subscribers. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the thumbs up, and I'll see you guys soon. Peace.
But anyways, interesting little video, overall by that, I believe, of BoxingWave. But I agree with a lot of his points there. But I actually do believe that Inoue will have to step up to 126 in order for, his career to be looked at as, on the same level as certain other all-time great level fighters. At least, on the same level as guys like, Crawford, Usyk, Canelo Alvarez, certain guys like that, of his era, at least, exactly like, and of course, if he beats all those guys at 126, as well as also beats Nakatani and a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, he will be remembered on certain levels like that of a Leonard and Roy Jones and Duran and certain guys like that. But anyways, now, of course, Crawford, Usyk, certain guys like that, anyways. But that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see where Mr. Inoue goes from here.